It's a little past 2, and I see people trickling in, but maybe it's time to get started. So welcome everyone for today's TEPS seminar. We're very excited to have today's speaker, whom I will let Lisa Deng introduce.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Abhishek. I'm really excited to present today's TEPS seminar speaker, Abhishek Gupta. I had the pleasure to meet Abhishek from his generous involvement with the McGill Physics Hackathon in the past, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about some of the things you're involved with now. So Abhishek is the founder and principal researcher at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute and a machine learning engineer at Microsoft, where he also serves at on the Commercial Software Engineering Responsible AI Board. He is representing Canada for the International Visitor Leaders Program administered by the US State Department as an expert on the future of work. He is an author of the forthcoming book titled Actionable AI Ethics, where that will be a practical and hands-on guide for operationalizing AI ethics. So without further ado, I'll leave the screen to Abhishek.
Hey, everybody, and thanks to Ahmad, Lisa, and Eve for inviting me. I'm really delighted to be here. If I seem a little bit, out of sorts, it might be because it's midnight here. I'm in India. So if I'm not clear or I'm rambling, just basically interrupt and say, hey, you're not making any sense. Just repeat what you just said. Or yeah, just, so my goal with the talk today, as you guys saw from the abstract, is to talk about this concept of the lab notebook, which I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with, and looking to bring that into the field of data science. Haven't really seen a lot of people do it. Think it's an interesting idea. In addition, I'm going to try and keep the presentation itself quite short because I know that what Ahmad had mentioned was typically well, one, this would have been in person, in which case, we would have had a chance to meet, but alas, we're, relegated to seeing each other in little boxes and little windows, which is all right. But also that we would have had, one-on-one sessions where, we could have discussed some of the things that you guys are working on, how I might, help, or if I have any advice potentially, but unfortunately, because of the time zone, I am unable to do that because it's past midnight here. And I have another presentation in about 6 hours for Singapore. So I'm going to try and grab some Z's after our presentation is done here. So what I'm doing is I'll keep my presentation itself fairly brief and leave a lot of time for questions. So, not just about the presentation, but stuff that, you guys are working on. If there are, things that I could potentially riff on with you guys. So yeah, I guess without further ado, let's just jump into presentation and we'll go from there. And we did a little tech check, so hopefully that works. Okay, if someone can give me a thumbs up if we're able to see this one. Okay, perfect, awesome. So I'm gonna go into presenter mode here. All right, yeah, so I'm going to talk about the lab notebook, which is basically trying to bring science back to data science. That was my attempt at being funny. So who am I basically, right? So I'm a practitioner. When I'm not doing presentations or thinking about AI ethics, I am writing code at Microsoft. So as Lisa said, I work in the commercial software engineering department, which basically looks to solve some of the toughest challenges in machine learning for the clients for Microsoft. So I get to do a lot of hands-on ML work there. In addition, as Lisa mentioned, I'm the founder and principal researcher at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, where we look at the societal impacts of AI. So that's pretty much a lot of the work that I end up doing. That's a lot of what I think about as well, right from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, sometimes during my sleep as well. I don't know what that says about me, but I'm being transparent, I guess. Uh, I'm also a community builder. Through my work, I've managed to build one of the largest public consultation communities around AI ethics, which has made significant contributions to documents like the Montreal Declaration of Responsible AI, some of the trustworthy AI guidelines of the European Commission. We worked with the State Department in the US, with the National Security Commission on AI, with the Australian Human Rights Council, with the Prime Minister's Office in New Zealand. So we've had an opportunity to leverage some of the voices that we've been able to bring together through my work as a community builder. I love writing. I write quite frequently on LinkedIn through blog posts. I've written for the Tech Review, for VentureBeat, Forbes. So lots of different places where featured some of my work. But all in all, I guess I'm a pragmatist, meaning that it's not just about theoretical stuff for me. It's really about bringing some of these ideas into practice, especially in the field of AI ethics, tends to be quite theoretical at times. So my goal is sort of making that as practical as possible. And sometimes I have strong opinions about things, but you can read the last line and make a decision for yourself how you feel about that. Okay, let's see. So I'm going to try out something new here. Well, new at least for me. I haven't done it live before, so I'm going to try and run a quick poll, and let's see if that ends up working. So let's just quickly talk about what comes to your mind when you hear the words lab notebook. And so I've created this thing called Mentimeter, and hopefully you guys are able to see that still on your screen. Okay, so I'm getting nods, which is great. So if you guys can go to menti.com and enter that code and throw in some of the words that come to your mind when you hear lab notebook, it should visualize here, hopefully. At least I tried it before the presentation, it worked, but that was just me alone. So yeah, fingers crossed. Let's just give that a whirl. Oh, hey, there's something that showed up, so that's cool. And I guess you're able to see the word cloud popping up as well, right, Ahmad? Yeah, okay, fantastic. That is cool. Okay, that's a lot of interesting things coming up. Yeah, we'll give it maybe another 30 seconds for other folks to chime in if you haven't had a chance yet. It's very cool to see. I also like the fact that there is pen and paper on there, which is cool, because that's the OG lab notebook. I respect that. That's very cool. Jotting notes, coding. Okay. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so I guess my talk is done then, because you guys seem to have all the right ideas in place, which is what basically this is supposed to be about, which makes sense, right? I mean, you guys are all scientists. You do this on a daily basis, so you've probably given this a lot of thought, which is great. So one of the nice things that I think I notice here, as you can all see, is that experiments is obviously a big focus, central sort of element for. And it's continuing to evolve, which is cool. So more people are entering stuff. That's great. But experiments are central to this whole idea, and organization, which is something that we'll get into. One of the things that is interesting, and I don't know if you see my cursor here, but there's the word scribbles, which I think is interesting because, and I'll talk about that as well in the context of how that makes sense from a data science perspective. One of the other things that oh wow, yeah, it moves fast. Right? I had that, yeah, reproducibility. Yeah, so that's one of the other core tenets, which is very exciting for me, not just from a scientific perspective, but when we start to get into AI ethics, that's been one of the core tenets that a lot of people have been pushing for. And I'm sure For those of you who've been keeping track of the machine learning field, in fact, Professor Joel Pinot from McGill had run a workshop at NeurIPS in 2018, I believe, where they found that a lot of papers actually weren't reproducible in the field of machine learning, which was sad. I mean, it's not something that's new, but it was sad to see that that was something that was present. So that's cool. If you bear with me for another couple of minutes, let me see if I'm able to move my slide here. And there should be another question that comes up. Okay. So this is sort of, I guess, extrapolating a little bit now that you've articulated what you mean, what comes to mind for you when you think about a lab notebook. So what do you think are some of the biggest pain points that a lab notebook can solve for your data science workflow? So, just as before, hopefully the new question shows up on your screen, or there will be a little pop-up at the top that says go to next slide, or the presentation has changed, go to slide. Should be a little pop-up at the top. Ahmad, maybe you're visible on my screen. Do you see that? Yeah, okay, cool. So I guess hopefully folks can enter in some words there. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic, wow. I really like this. How cool is technology, right? Yeah, reproducing. That's one of the big forgetfulness. I like whoever put that in. I really appreciate that. I forget stuff all the time. It's like relearning things, forgetting steps. Exactly. That is very relevant. All in one place. Yeah, that's a good point. Previous changes, version control. Yes. So that's something that I will get into in a couple of slides in terms of how I think version control, especially in a lab notebook setting, is going to be very important. Reopening old projects. Oh boy, talk to me about that. How much I love that. It's like looking at code that an alien wrote, basically, because it's like, wait, who is this atrocious data scientist who created this code, right? Turns out it's you. Turns out we have this thing called Git, where you can look up who made commits. So more often than not, it's just you who just had bad coding practices. I'll give it a couple, a few more seconds here. I think some of the core themes are emerging here, especially around reproducing, remembering, organization. I think documenting, yeah, again, very, very important. Taking notes, tracking progress. Yeah, I really like that. And I think there, I don't know, we'll get into it in probably the Q&A section as well, in terms of how many of you actually end up using some of these, tools for experiment tracking, like MLflow, like DVC, or weights and biases. And I'll, sort of at least touch on that in terms of squaring it with this idea of a lab notebook. Okay, bon, I think this is good. I think we've got a lot of the key ideas, I think, are around organization, reproducibility, remembering, version control. Oh, this is very cool. See verification on there. It's cool. Oh, inconvenient. I wonder if you feel that, as in it solves inconvenience for you. Yeah. Good. Okay, so this was fun. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I actually can see everybody's faces, so I guess maybe Ahmad can see if people are nodding or not. Either way. Okay, cool. That's fun. Awesome. Okay, so the live poll worked, despite it being late at night. Very cool. Let me just pull, and pardon my slow computer. I keep ranting about it. My team at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute is fed up of me. They're like, hey man, just invest in a new computer, right? Anyways, okay, so the poll worked, which is great. So what is this idea of a lab notebook, right? And I think a lot of the themes you guys already touched on, which was great. Basically, this idea of a lab notebook is for it to serve as an organizational tool, right? So that was one of the big things that everybody pointed out. It's also for it to serve as a memory aid. And what I mean by the memory aid is that, especially if you're involved with projects that, span a few months, there are things that we forget, right? There's a lot going on in our lives. Unfortunately, more so with the pandemic, there are a million things going on. Life between, personal life and work is blurred. Not that I guess we were, strangers to that, but I think it's become exacerbated. And It's always good to have that as a memory aid. And I threw this last point in there because I think in a traditional lab notebook setting, when you're working with an academic lab where you might file for patents, it's great to have a record of ownership of your ideas. So that's perhaps more so geared towards an academic setting, but maybe less so in a corporate setting where we're all perhaps working together as a team. We don't really, at least in my context, don't really file for patents because we're just working on applied products. But nonetheless, it's an important instrument for having some record of ownership of your ideas. And again, this will become more clear when we don't think of the lab notebooks just in the traditional sense where historically it's been a physical notebook, but more so now thinking of it in a version control setting where it's shared across multiple people. You through your Git commit. Well, I hope you use Git and not Mercurial or SVN or some ancient version control systems. If you're still using that, again, I can't see your faces, but I guess throw in a comment in your chat if you use Mercurial or something, and then I'd be happy to have a little chat with you and see why you use that and not use Git. Anyways, I'm just kidding. There are benefits to using some of those old version control systems as well. But anyways, it's a great way to have a record of ownership of ideas as well. So why do this at all, right? I mean, I think one of the key things that you can do with a lab notebook is that you can sort of put the headline there, right? Which is why are we doing this project? And the reason I emphasize that is when you think about an ML project, over its life cycle, what ends up happening, and let me talk about it from a corporate perspective, right? Like there are sort of evolving business needs that come in, evolving sort of requests from the customers that come in where they have this next exciting idea of what they can do with their data. Even though sometimes the data itself is quite limited, and some of the ethics considerations, unfortunately, and I'll be very heavy on the ethics lens because no surprise, that's a large part of my existence, I guess. But those tend to fall by the wayside. So having this as your North Star, documented and version controlled and present in the lab notebook, I think is an interesting contribution or value addition of why are we doing this project, and sort of documenting it up front and center in the lab notebook. One of the other things that's interesting is this idea of having a lineage of your decision making, right? And what I mean by that is think to your workflow in data science, right? Not only do we have Untitled notebook number 23, which if you're like me in my early days, please stop doing that. It's a horrible practice. There are better ways to name our notebooks and track lineage. But it's not just that, right? I mean, even if you're using any of the tooling like MLflow, DVC, weights and biases, you do have experimental tracking in terms of the hyperparameters, the data that you're using, and all of these changes that you make. But what sometimes gets lost in that is why did we make those changes in the first place, right? So why did we choose to go from one model architecture to another? Why did we choose to make some of these hyperparameter changes? And yes, you can look at some of those graphs. Let's say you're tracking, validation and testing error, right? And you look at the differences and you say, okay, well, that's perhaps why I chose to, maybe add a little bit more regularization or, choose to go to another model architecture. But you're leaving a lot of that to guesswork. Come back 3 months later, you're basically relying on guesswork and memory. And if you're like me, I'm quite forgetful. I don't have photographic memory. I wish I did. I don't, which means that we're making a lot of guesses. So the important contribution of the lab notebook in this context then is that you're able to track the lineage of your decision making, which is, I think, very important, which comes to my last point here, which is on generating audit trails. And again, this is more so important from an ethics perspective. We don't have this just yet, but if you look at some of the emergent regulations taking place in different parts of the world, there is a push for having audits be performed on your ML systems, and a key part of those audits is going to be able to justify why you chose certain architectures, and of course things like MLflow, DVC, weights and biases will help you have audit trails for your hyperparameters for your data sets, but not so much for why you made certain decisions. And that's where this lab notebook idea can help. I think a lot of people already pointed that out, which was why I said I could stop my presentation, is that you can keep track of your ideas, right? Leaving little notes for yourself. It's also a record for future research work. Sometimes, funding runs out, or, you run into other sort of, let's say, situations arise in a lab context, or even in a corporate setting where you have to shift gears and you might want to come back and pick up on something later, right? So this acts as a record for you to not have to think about all these things from scratch. Hopefully reading it, quote unquote, page by page, whatever a page means in this context, you're able to arrive at that. Reproducibility, again, something that a lot of you mentioned, is another sort of key contribution that a lab notebook can make. Basically, avoid repetition and hair pulling, right? Why a decision was made. I think that's another important thing. So how do we do it, right? Hopefully you're not frantically typing away on a keyboard trying to figure this out. So there is a sane, rational way of going about how to do this. Using something like a version control system where you're able to collaborate on that notebook. So again, in a traditional context, in a lab notebook, again, I guess most of you are no strangers to that. You would have had your own individual notebooks, which typically would be an intellectual property of the lab that you work at. But in this context, it's something that you can host on a version control system. Hopefully, something that's Git based. Again, strong opinions, but but something that you can share with others and sort of track there. One of my observations doing this has been for it to be an everyday effort, right? So again, that might seem onerous at the beginning, but little bits of everyday effort, I guess, add up. And you guys are all scientists here, so you definitely see the value in putting in continual efforts, and you see the ROI, or the return on investment on that sort of play out in the long run. But everyday efforts in maintaining that lab notebook is important. One of the other things that I found to be particularly useful is to have a ledger-like approach, which is useful in generating some of these audit trails, meaning that you don't actually go back and edit stuff, which is, again, something that's best practice in even maintaining a regular lab notebook, is that you don't go out and scratch stuff, tear out pages, because that sort of invalidates the integrity of the lab notebook. Again, a version control system sort of naturally lends itself to that. But again, treating it as a ledger helps. This last point is interesting because I think someone in that word cloud thing pointed it out as well. How do you go about doing this, right? In the sense that sometimes you come up with these ideas. There's an inkling of something that you might want to pursue. My approach to doing this has been to start with a cursory jotting down of ideas, right? So be very brief in when you're in the initial phases of exploring an idea, but towards the end of the day, or end of a couple of days, depending on how long your models are running or whatever the case might be, move towards a more detailed description of what happened, right? And the reason I make this distinction from starting from cursory and going to detail is that it reduces the onus. If you're like me, engineers are lazy, or I should say, I as an engineer am lazy, meaning I hate documentation. If you all are with me, I don't know, maybe a Matt can tell me if folks are nodding or giving a thumbs up. Heck, we don't like documentation. But how do you still benefit from having a lab notebook? Start cursory. Have a few have a few details that you can expand on once the experiment starts to seem promising. That said, and I'll touch on that in a second, you should record negative results and failures as well, which is something that's common scientific practice. But the more you edge towards applied ML in the industry, we start to forget to do that, right? Some of those untitled notebooks 23, they get lost in the picture because they failed. And it's only, Untitled notebook number 55 that actually work, that you push into version control, and it's like, hey guys, my model works. And it's like, oh, that's fantastic. But what else did you try again? That sort of gets lost, right? And it's important insights, because somewhere down the line in a future project, you might, um, be able to benefit from some of these, different architectures that you might have tried, different learnings that you might have had. So recording those negative results and failures is quite important as well. One of the other things that I found is that, at the end of whatever 1 to 3 day cycle, based on how long your models take to train, clarifying and rephrasing those cursory to detailed notes also helps. At least I found it particularly helpful. Also, generating a template once you start feeling comfortable will help you build consistency across time, right? And this is something that I strongly advocate for, because it'll help you become better as a scientist, as a data scientist as well, I guess. But especially if you come across, or if you're able to generate a template for yourself that is useful and meaningful, share that with the rest of your lab mates as well, so that you are together as a lab have something that starts to become very well structured, and something that's again, going back to that idea of reproducibility, you start to put those elements in as an established practice. The tenet here, I mean, I don't know who the quote belongs to, but it's better to write it down and not need it than to not write it down and need it. So that should really be the mindset as you're, thinking about what you should put into that lab notebook. Now, typically, if we would have had more time in the presentation / the demo effect wasn't a real thing, I would have walked you through a workflow on how to do it, but I'm going to refrain from doing that for 2 reasons. 1, demo effect. 2, it's almost 1 a.m. here, which means that I'm bound to make mistakes and make a fool of myself. So we're not going to do that, but I'm happy to share some templates and tools that I've found to be particularly useful, in an email after or something, so that you guys can sort of put this into practice. Now, it won't be a surprise that I have at least one slide on AI ethics, and that's what I'm all about, right? Which I've also snuck in here and there. But I think when we talk about this concept of lab notebooks, one of the important things is that it helps with reproducibility, as we already spoke about, and as you guys pointed out. As I pointed out, also it helps in generating audit trails, which will start to become more important, especially in a applied corporate context. But in a lab setting, obviously, that auditing for your work, especially if you're going through a patent review or something, it's useful there. And the last point I think is very important in being just transparent, right? In terms of how you arrived at your results. Again, transparency sort of ties in with that idea of reproducibility, but also in sharing your work with your lab mates, right? Just being sort of, forthcoming in terms of how you arrived at particular things, where you failed, so that you set context perhaps for your junior lab mates as well, in terms of what works, what doesn't, how they can do better in terms of their own scientific journey as well. Lastly, as Lisa mentioned, I am writing this book on titled Actionable AI Ethics. The goal is really to move from principles to practice. If you spend any time thinking about some of these ideas, you'll see that there's a lot of theoretical work in this space, and my goal is to make that actionable. As I said in the beginning, I'm a practitioner. I love bringing things concretely into an applied context, and that's really what that is all about. So yeah, that's really it. That's my presentation. I guess I went a little over time. I don't know if I did not. Amar is saying okay. He gave me the thumbs up, so that's awesome. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I am happy to take questions. We can chat about things that you're working on. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Abhishek. So if there are any questions, you can either write them in the chat box or unmute yourself. Well, if there aren't any, thanks again, Abhishek, for the presentation. I think it was a very good reminder that all the works that we do usually would benefit a lot from being reproducible. And I think one thing that we can draw from this is that it is as important to write good manuscript as it is to make your code, you know, either available or being able to share it for other people to reproduce your data.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I think that's definitely very important, especially I think you know, as I was mentioning, Professor Joa Pino's sort of she kickstarted that at NeurIPS, you know, well, almost 2.5 years ago now, I guess. And it was interesting, right? I mean, a lot of the ML papers weren't reproducible. This is something that we've seen in the field of psychology for a while, where you know some of those papers haven't been reproducible. But if that problem starts to bleed into the field of machine learning as well, which is now underpinning so many of our endeavors, I guess all of our endeavors in some capacity, um, it's really a sad state of affairs. And as you know, scientists, it's important that we push back against that. And there are tons of tools available that can help us counter that, right? So the more open, transparent, we can be, the better it is.
Yeah, and especially since machine learning is now popping up even more and more in the field of exoplanets, I think this is a good reminder that we should be somewhat skeptical of how good our results using machine learning can be.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I was in fact just in a chat with Cade Metz, who writes for the New York Times, and it was interesting in terms of how it all basically started in 2012, and sort of with the ImageNet moment, the AlexNet paper, and now we're at a stage where everybody is using machine learning. We also have a lot of folks who pick up these skills through online boot camps, etc., because it's so popular. Somewhere along the line, some of the fundamentals of good software engineering practices, good just scientific practices get lost, because we have a lot of self-trained folks, which is not a bad thing at all. I mean, we've got a lot of great improvements that have come from that, but it behooves us to again be careful and be rigorous, at least in our endeavors as scientists and academics and practitioners, and share those best practices out with as many people as possible, especially those who don't come with some formal training in that regard, to be able to apply this to their field as well.
So I'll just jump in here. So if there are no questions at all, then I suppose we can end here. Eve, did you have anything you wanted to add on?
No, other than saying thank you so much to Abhishek for the really great talk, and for being so generous to give us a talk when it's like your bedtime. I absolutely enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So I suppose we'll see everybody next month for the next TEPS seminar. And yeah, have a wonderful day. See you all soon.